What's up ninjas, Brendan here. We are continuing AI development with Injective, and today that's all going to be about OpenWeb UI. We're going to learn what it is, how to set it up for using and building applications. Let's dive in. So what is OpenWeb UI? OpenWeb UI is an extensible, feature-rich, user-friendly, self-hosted AI platform, etc. Right? And it's designed to operate entirely offline. And so think about ChatGPT or Claude. They host an instance of a chat interface that allows you to send messages to LLMs, and then it displays their responses. That's exactly what OpenWeb UI is, and it pretty much does the same thing, except that you run it on your own computer. So why would you want to do this? So there's a few reasons. The first is that you have more decentralization, so you own your own data, make it harder for tech companies to track your activity, etc. The second reason is that you have access to more models. If you combine OpenWeb UI with OpenRouter, then that's a golden combination because you can use any model you want and you can even swap between them within the same chat. And that's something you cannot really do within the siloed environment of a single AI provider, because those are tied to the LLMs of their parent company. And a bonus third reason, the first two will actually demo in this video, but if you have a computer with beast specs, then you can run some of the latest LLMs on localhost and you can connect to those too. And this way you'll be truly fully decentralized. So who says that decentralization applies only to blockchains? The principle is just as applicable to AI as well. All right, now time to install and run OpenWeb UI. In the browser, I'm going to look at the how to install section over here, right? And you'll see that it recommends using pip to install it, but I wouldn't recommend it. I've tried this and I've gotten it to work, but it was really messy getting the right version of Python, configuring VN properly, etc. Right? So not worth it. Instead, I recommend using UV instead of pip, as it is much easier to get Python packages in general running. It's quite similar to npm run or npx if you're familiar with that. So if you don't have this already, right, I've already done that. So let's say I start in a directory, and I'll do make directory web UI slash data, right? So I create an OpenWeb UI directory and data, and then I cd into OpenWeb UI, right? And inside of this, I have a data directory, and I'm going to use that shortly, right? And here's the magic command, data dir, and then I'll run uvx 3.11, Python 3.11. Right, so the data dir is the environment variable is set to the directory that's currently inside of here. And then the uvx command specifies the exact Python version, followed by the package name for OpenWeb UI, and then we run it, right? So if we look at the terminal, right, we're waiting for a line saying that the terminal has started, right? And then we should be able to see this OpenWeb UI. Okay, it looks like it has loaded. All right, and this is your first time. It'll actually take more than a minute most of the time, even with the fast internet connection and a recent machine, because you need to download and install a lot of Python dependencies. Thankfully, UV parallelizes this to a large extent, and it's much faster than pip. All right. So now we can go to localhost 8080 and we'll have an interface, and it looks pretty similar to ChatGPT or Claude if you've used those before, right? And so congratulations, you've just downloaded, installed, and run OpenWeb UI. Now the next thing we have to do is to configure it to use OpenRouter, which we've covered in the previous video, and also to add the Injective MCP server. So to do that, I'm going to click on this button here in the corner and then click on settings, right? And then I'll click on admin settings, and then under connections, right, you see that I have a couple configured here already, but most likely you'll have to click on this plus icon over here, and then you have to fill in this form and then press save, and then I'll add a new line here. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to show you one I've done previously, right? This is the settings that you'll need for OpenRouter. So the URL needs to be openrouter.ai/API/v1 and toggle that on, right? And then for authentication, you need bearer, and over here you need to paste in your OpenRouter API key, right? Which you should have obtained over here and copy paste it into a text file, right? If not, just press create a new API key and you can use a new one. All right, that's all there is really. And then you can press save when you're done with that, and you can close it, right? Right. So now we're ready to chat with the LLMs. So if you go to new chat, you can actually type, something here and it'll work. But before we do that, let's connect to the MCP server as well, right? So here's the Injective Documentation. So under /developers/AI, you'll find an MCP server page. And inside of this page, you'll find a streamable HTTP URL, right? Which is basically the domain or subdomain / for the documentation /MCP at the end. So you just copy that and then go back to OpenWeb UI, and you need to connect that. As I mentioned earlier, OpenWeb UI cannot use the MCP server directly. Instead, we need to create an OpenAPI server that proxies the MCP servers that you want. For this, thankfully, they provide a purpose-built tool called MCPO that does exactly this. So in the terminal, let's open up a new tab, and then we want to create an MCPO config file. Right, so we've got a file that's inside the same OpenWeb UI directory. Doesn't have to be, but keeps it organized. So we create that file, right? And I think I already have one from preparation. Right, there we go. So you need to edit this file, right, to create a JSON structure that looks exactly like this. And basically it's an object with MCP servers. And then inside that, you have another object called Injective Documentation. And inside of that, you need a type to specify that as streamable HTTP, right? So as to correspond to what this uses. Mitlify exposes it as streamable HTTP. And then you also need the URL, right? Which is something that you've copied from here, right? And so just save that file and exit. And then once you've done that, you're ready to run the command to run the MCPO server, which will proxy MCP into OpenAPI. All right, and this one is much faster because all it does is to run a proxy server. It isn't doing much. All right, so you can see that it has successfully connected to the MCP server. Now, once you see this, once you see UVcorn running on and then this localhost URL, all you need to do is copy this and you go to a browser tab and you paste it, and then you do /docs at the end, and you'll get a page that looks like this. And then it'll list you all the MCP servers that were available, and there's only one in this case, so you click on it, and you'll notice that you go to the localhost address followed by Injective Documentation /docs, and this will be your interactive documentation, Open API style or Swagger style if you're familiar with those, right? And you can see that there's a post endpoint, and that does the same thing as an Open API interactive docs, right? So you can say explain, let's see, Claude to me. So this is a term that's specific to Injective, and if you Google that, you probably wouldn't get an Injective related result, but this is the Injective Docs MCP server, right? And you can see that's given a response. Yep, not going to read all of it, but it has, consulted quite a few different links within the Injective Docs. So this is the kind of thing that an LLM wants to be able to do, right? All right, now we're ready to chat, right? So let's go back to OpenWeb UI, open up a new chat, just select from this drop down whichever you want, right? So let's go for, say, GPT, right? And I'm going to write a prompt, write me a poem about blockchain, and specify the style, iambic pentameter, 2 verses. Right, so this is doing something which the LLM, intrinsically should be able to do based on its training data, right? So this is just a pure LLM request. This is being sent to the server of OpenRouter, and then OpenRouter is redirecting that or rerouting that to OpenAI server, and then the response from the GPT 5.1 model is going to be redirected here. And it's a thinking model, so you can see exactly what it's considering, and this is the response. Yeah, this looks pretty good. All right, now let's do the same thing as well, but I'm going to become more specific, right? So write me a poem about injective blockchain, right, specifically. And now I'm going to intentionally cause it to error, right? So use the Injective Docs MCP server for details. If you are not able to access this, please abort with an error message. At the end, please list the sources. All right, so I'm going to do this, but I haven't really enabled the Injective Docs MCP server yet, right? So let's try it out. There we go. We've got an error message, right? So what we're going to do next is configure the MCP server. And to do that, I click on this icon over here and then press Settings and go to External Tools, right? And you'll see here that I already have one configured already, right? And you can see that in action over here, right? So what you'll want to do is you want to essentially copy this URL from your browser where you opened up the Open API specs, right, over here, and you just paste that over here. And then for Open API spec, you want to select the URL, and then you paste the same thing, but then you type /openapi.json at the end, right? And for auth, you want to select none because this is unauthenticated. Now you can press this to verify the connection, and if you see something like this, that means it is successful. You'll see that your MCPO server has successfully proxied the result. Now if you press save, I'll go back to that. Now I have my OpenAPI proxy server for the Injective Docs MCP server from Netlify already configured. So why didn't this work, right? And the reason for that is because you gotta actually click on this button over here, this 4 diamonds in a diamond shape, I guess, and you've got to toggle on Injective Docs. That gives it access to that particular server. Now let's copy this one again and paste it again. Oops, not the response, sorry, the request, and then send the message. All right, so it's thinking. Okay, this time it didn't exit immediately, so I'm fairly certain that it's done a tool call. And you can see, there you go. If you click on source, you can see it's consulted search Injective Docs, right? Which is the name of the tool that is exposed by the MCP server, right? And you can see that it all corresponds, right? We've got the search Injective Docs specified over here. All right, so it's consulted, the MCP server has returned 10 results, and here's my 2-verse poem for Injective. All right, that's actually not too bad. All right, that was awesome, and we can see that adding the MCP server made this LLM chat much more knowledgeable by being able to retrieve specific high-quality information, targeted information about Injective, rather than rely on outdated information from when the model was trained, or rely on a, say, like a general purpose search, which can be overly broad and not focused, right? And this is, this is kind of like a, like a fun but not particularly, say, useful use case of the Injective Docs MCP server. Just, like an easy one to demonstrate. But when you want to actually do, say, vibe coding on Injective and you need specific technical information, then having your data trained on this or being accessed directly from the documentation, that would be a fantastic thing to have. So, yeah. All right, let's recap what we have learned in this video with a quiz, right? So first question, there's 3 of them in total, right? OpenWeb UI allows you to use and interact with LLMs directly. Give you a second to think about that. And the answer is true, right? All you need to do is select a model and begin chatting, right? You do not need an AI agent, and you do not need a proxy. All right, second question of 3. OpenWeb UI allows you to use MCP servers directly. Give you a second to think about that. And the answer is this, false, right? The MCP server that we were using was proxied via MCPO and into a format or protocol known as OpenAPI, which OpenWeb UI understands, right? So yeah, the other 2 options are incorrect. Okay, final one, right? OpenWeb UI allows you to interact with LLMs in incognito mode. I'll give you a second to think about that. And the answer is this, partial, right? So your LLM interactions are known to the model providers because you send the request to the models. They're on their servers. So of course they'll know what your requests are and what the responses to your requests are by definition, right? But they will not know necessarily who you are because that's obfuscated, right? You're going through a third party via an API key. And that's kind of analogous to blockchain, interestingly as well, right? Because blockchains are public ledger and everything is out in the open. Every single transaction anyone can read, any data is readable. So it's actually even more open in that regard. But the thing is, your identity is not tied to your address unless you reveal it somehow elsewhere. But the blockchain itself inherently will keep your identity separate from your address. And so it's kind of very similar in that regard. All right. That's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching.